All right, so Yasmin is here from a little publication called Politico. Is that correct? Fantastic. Okay, good. Bill Ty is here. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up to Bill Ty. Okay. So quick pop, let's say, who has used Zoom here? Look at the show of hands. There's so many of them. Okay. All right. Okay. Who has used Canva here? Look at that.
All right.
Okay. He had a little part to play in that, and you should basically hear his story. Bill, it's wonderful to have you here. Yasmin, over to you. Fantastic.
Mike?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds
well,
like
Bill, Bill,
right through yours. It's fine.
perfect. Okay, Bill Ty, thank you so much for joining us to talk to everyone today. Let's just dive right into it. When you describe the power of technology, you often use the word of a sword being double-edged. Talk about those two sides and how that informs your decision-making as an investor.
Yeah. So I've been in venture now since 1991. So I've been funding companies for a good 35 years. And what's obvious to all of us that are in tech is that the cycles are they're both getting bigger every time, and they're accelerating. So I started off originally in computer hardware, doing semiconductor chips, and then I crawled up the stack. This is like early 90s, and then moved up the stack to communications equipment, and then to internet infrastructure in the late 90s. Those areas by themselves didn't really have as big a double-edged sword, because those were really just price performance, more bits and atoms moving for the same price, and you could build, all kinds of cool stuff. When the web really hit, Web 2.0, and kids like Mark Zuckerberg could build things in dorm rooms, and content and the expression layer exploded, and the data science layer was kind of born. Things just happened so fast and in such volume, you could fund things that felt like really cool, but they would develop side effects at rates that you just could not imagine. And I guess the typical example is Facebook, right? So, we all enjoyed it in the beginning, and it was very fun to connect with people and share your pictures. But sure enough, the whole field of data invasion, data privacy, came up to the point that that data, which is your data, would get used or misused, depending on how you classify it, by Facebook, by other organizations. Cambridge Analytica was kind of white hot tip of the flame for part of that, and so I think technology increasingly, and now that we're moving, so did chips, boxes, networks, expression layer, data science, and within that data science area are AI, blockchains, and this AI stuff. It's it's a little scary, because I think there are some things that you guys are all seeing it. The ability to create deep fakes is accelerating so fast that it's a great thing to work on these technologies that are productive, but the side effects can happen so fast and it's such big volume that they get out of control before you can put the genie back in the bottle. And then you got to spend a lot of time trying to undo everything that happened before, which is a lot harder if you don't put guardrails on it first.
Yeah, and speaking with, putting the genie back in the bottle, which is hard to do with tech and AI, how do you balance the speed at which innovation is moving with making sure that things are safe and real and authentic?
Yeah, so this really comes down to what are the values and culture of an organization as you fund it, as you develop it, and they'll all stem from the founding team, and particularly the CEO. Is if you have, kind of integrity, as it turns out these days, is more and more subjective, but if you have somebody of high integrity that is aware in the beginning, and I think Google's early tagline of "Don't be evil," wonderful. That that they started off with that. I think as the companies become more corporatized, I don't see it as like a source of evil really, but because they started from a good place, and you can't say that about all companies that got big, right? So I think it's really about what can you as an investor do to empower the right kind of people with the right values and help guide and steer the culture of a company so that it doesn't get off the rails if you can help it.
So we're all here obviously speaking about empowering. This is to impact 1 billion. From your perspective, investing in huge companies like Zoom and Canva, what are signs you look for that kind of illustrate this company is going to be massive?
It's I think I always tell the same story. So if you've heard me speak before, I'll be repeating myself. But I sometimes can't even believe how lucky I was to be in certain places at certain times. I came out to the Valley in the mid 80s when it was still agrarian in some ways. And I lived in a little apartment in Sunnyvale in the back of a cherry orchard, and in that era, the startups were really, the name Silicon Valley was just starting to get used because there were a bunch of silicon companies. And the startups at the time were like, Intel was a few years old and AMD had just been started. And I was at the startup of a company called LSI Logic that was founded by the CEO of Fairchild. So if you guys had ever heard about, the lore of Fairchild Semiconductor, there was this one company where Sherman Fairchild was this eccentric, hard to deal with guy, but he hired brilliant people, and people didn't like working for him. So it blew up, so a couple of guys left to start Intel, one started AMD, one started National Semiconductor. So one went on to start Sequoia, and one started Kleiner Perkins, So I joined the CEO of Fairchild after those guys left. The remaining CEO started LSI Logic. We were funded by Fund 2 of Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins. And our board was Don Valentine and Tom Perkins, and IVP was a passive investor. So when I finally went into venture capital, I would follow Don Valentine around, because he was the only guy I knew in the business. And we funded a company called Microchip together that I don't. You guys all use their products from Microchip. You probably don't know the company, but I think it hit $100 billion in value at one point. Might still be there, but they make microcontrollers. And so Don and I were at a board meeting. We went to the airport in Phoenix, and our flight got canceled. So I had to have dinner with him. And so I said to Don, and I was very young at the time, I was like, Don, what do I have to do to be good at this? And Don, if you know the legacy of Sequoia, he's a very harsh guy. Doesn't like to talk. And so he condenses things, and he said, it's very simple. You only have to get 3 things right: markets, management, and don't overpay. If you do those 3 things, you will make money every time. He said, but you got to get the market right, because you can have the best team in the world and infinite money. You pick the wrong market, you will lose money every time. So just get the market right, and you just rotate the people in and out till it works. And so I'm not the kind of guy that fires and hires and fires and hires. So and I think with the advent of Web 2.0, it became a lot more capital light. In the Sequoia of old days, Don used to run around saying, we own the desks. Because, the building and the desks and the factory were the main thing, and you would swap the people in to run the machines. And I think as technology has evolved, it's become so much easier to just start a company. And so I think I still work to that formula. I'm always looking for what's a market or set of markets where there's some kind of a structural change about to happen, where it could be sweeping, and where I have a little bit of a knowledge advantage to understand what might unfold. I think in the case of both Zoom and Canva, I had built a company that had 10 data centers. I was founding CEO of I started an ISP in 95, and remarkably by year 2000, I had data centers in 10 countries, kind of like what's happening now, but they were internet data centers. And Goldman, Morgan, and Solomon took it public in year 2000. And I think there was this gap until we had like the, the Web 2.0 thing. But because I had built the data centers, I really understood the implications of the new cloud architectures and the ability to change the cost structure and the scalability of certain kinds of applications. And if you think of Canva and Zoom in terms of, there was Adobe selling plastic discs in cardboard boxes for $900, or there was design from the cloud. Or if you think about the old model of the WebExes and the older video conferencing systems, those were not scalable because your browser, if you had 10 people on a WebEx, for example, your browser had to be the engine to generate 10 different streams from your computer into the internet and maintain those connections, as opposed to the Zoom architecture, which is one hop in. If you want 50 million people on, you just light up more servers. So infinite scalability on a relative basis with much higher quality. So I that was like so obvious to me. I knew that there would be a time when those kinds of things would win. I never know how long it will take, and I never know how big they will get, but it was obvious they would change. So big market, structural change, and pick the right person.
And talk a little bit about what you've learned throughout the years about human connectivity and productivity that you're now applying to your mission of climate and energy technology.
So it always boils down to people, and I talked a lot about values and culture, and those are kind of like really squishy things, but in the end, the best companies are just piles of people that are united by a certain set of values and culture, and they stem from the founder. So every company takes on the persona of the people that lead it, and there are many ways to become successful and many value sets that will work, but I tend to be drawn to a certain type of person. And so if you look at Zoom and Canva, because they're being talked about here, both of those are mission-driven, just caring entrepreneurs. Melanie Perkins, company still not publicly traded yet, she literally 2 weeks ago just donated $100 million of cash for universal basic income for a city in Africa, just to get people out of subsistence. And she doesn't really think about how wealthy she is. She just the tagline for the company is to create the most value and do the most good as possible. And then Eric at Zoom, when they got going, they set up there's a fund inside Zoom. They took part of their balance sheet, and it's called Zoom Cares, and they donate to causes. They try to fight homelessness in their hometown of San Jose. I mean, it's just kind of a certain type of person that thinks beyond themselves, and so. And which leads to note, I mean, the ACTI nomenclature. I don't know if my title's on there, but yeah. So I have a lot of different roles because I work with a lot of companies and funds and things, but I usually put ACTI Global as my tagline, and what that is a 501c3, and it stands for Athletes, Conservationists, Technologists, Artists, Innovators, because I've got this crazy group of people that from all of those fields that support two things. One is environmental conservation, and the other is economic empowerment through entrepreneurship. And it's a collective of, I don't know how many people now, but it's in the thousands. And we have like little pods, and anywhere there's a town with a warm, windy, beautiful beach, we have people that live there. Anyway, so we have this group that basically goes around and we do these like meetups that are a little sport. We do kiteboarding, sports activities, surfing, and it's become this like fabric of humans that is a fertilizer for the creation, funding of these kinds of companies. Like both Canva. I met Melanie Perkins when she was 23 years old. She was making high school yearbooks in her mom's living room in Perth, Australia, and I went out there to kiteboard, and I met her. And she described to me what she wanted to do. She was an Adobe instructor teaching people how to use that complex, interface. And she described what she wanted to do. And I was like, "Can you build that?" She said, no, I'm not technical. I said, well, if you find somebody that can do that, I might back you. And then it took 3 years, but our community found her a CTO and we formed Canva. So I think this collective or 501c3 Acti Global is a little bit like a bed of fertilizer that also has some rain, because a lot of the people have had hits and can fund things. So you take an entrepreneur, plant them in that little fertilizer with our community, little water comes down, it's funding, and you're off to a start. And then often you get customers right away from our community and lots of help and advice to grow.
Was there a moment or realization you had where you were like, okay, I'm going to pivot to climate and energy now. This is where my attention should be?
Yeah, I think it's oddly enough, it has to do with kiteboarding, because so when my data center company went public in year 2000, I had this unfulfilled dream of windsurfing around the world. And I wasn't going to do it all in one shot. I was going to basically stop in cool cities and just spend years traveling around. But I didn't do that. I got married and all that. But I also learned how to kiteboard. So, which is a natural next thing for windsurfing people. And I don't know how, but I ended up getting sponsored as an athlete too. So I would basically run around the world, in all these places. And often I would go to the same places, but it was once a year or twice a year. And you could have a sibling and you see them every day and it doesn't look like anything's changing. But if you have a cousin you see once a year, you see the change. And so we would see I would go to these same beaches and you could literally see the deterioration and the pollution in different places year after year after year. And that made me think, I should try to do something about this. And then it just so happened that we had this collective of all these people. So we started doing beach cleanups and things like that. And every time we go to a place, we donate to local charities, often around ocean conservation. So that was kind of the big shift, I think, between 2003 and 2006 for me. And then I started to realize, because I started to donate to some charities too. And it was frustrating because I started 40% of your money goes to overhead, so I was like, we need to do something different. It can't just be donating to other people to use their money to market to raise more money. It should be something active. So that is part of the name Acti. It's kind of like active conservation, actually doing things. And then it was clear that the commercially viable companies don't have to go raising money in the same way. It's kind of, if they can generate their own revenue and also do good at the same time, they're much more durable than charities out there hat in hand trying to get money out of you. So I started to steer towards funding companies with a lens that I'm interested, but do you have an angle that will do some good for this world? So I'd say that pretty much any company that I fund now has to have some element where I think it's going to induce positive change. And that the values that we have at our nonprofit are people. So we have vows that we induct people at certain times, but it's, there's 3 vows. One is stand for people that stand for something greater than themselves, leave people in places better off, and use your power to empower others. And that came from literally years of the community kind of existing and some of the people that drive our functions asking why do we even exist? What is it that draws people to our stuff? And it just turned out that, as we started to distill we had to ask ourselves, because it was never intended to create this. We just wanted to understand what are the values and culture of our organization that make people want to come. How do we reinforce that? So that's Acti Global.
How big of a factor is regulation and policy when it comes to investing in energy solutions?
Oh, this is huge. It's becoming a bigger issue every day. So I think what's happening right now, you all hear about the AI data. You all know NVIDIA now, even though it's been around for 40 years and no one knew it for the first 25. because the GPUs are so critical to AI, and because the spend from the hyperscalers is 10 billion here, 100 billion there. It's like, no one's ever seen anything like it. They're a $50 billion a quarter company with something like 78% cash flow. It's mind blowing. And so those GPUs are power hungry. And so the advent of AI, the build of the infrastructure to drive it, is causing these things that you would have never thought could happen, like Microsoft inciting Constellation Energy to reawaken 3 Mile Island. So the nuclear power plants are going back on, and they're basically guaranteeing the production capacity that'll take it all. And so I think what is happening now is the strain on the grid that was really designed between 50 and 100 years ago, and that grid is awful. It's got to be remade, and it's a little bit like, but worse, the phone companies in the early 90s before the internet really hit. So you had a monopoly provider that could charge $1.40 a minute for a phone call, and VoIP was coming for free. And they fought it. They didn't want the internet to be what it is. They wanted to be able to charge more for it. But the Telecom Deregulation Act of 1996 broke up AT&T into pieces so that the parts would compete with each other. It lowered prices. It allowed the creation of ILEX and CLEX and companies like MFS and WorldCom and Quest Communications. So the fiber got built out, and the foundation was laid for the explosion of innovation we have today. The grid is worse. The grid is, I could go in for an hour about how bad the grid is, but it literally has to be wiped out and turned into a context-aware cloud where there's kind of a software layer that load balances, has awareness of what's on the endpoints, and also the green energy coming in, because it used to be just a centralized burn coal, push the electrons. Now it's got to be bidirectional. And that giant blackout that happened in 3 countries, Portugal, France, Spain, they all blew out for a couple of days. I'm pretty sure that kind of stuff is going to start happening all over America in probably 18 months.
Wow, that's crazy. We have an audience question,
Yep.
and we're running out of time. What would you like your legacy to be?
That I was a good guy. I think that's about it. I do want to say one thing. You're all going to get one of these from Raid and the team. This is a book that's coming out on Halloween. One thing we didn't even talk about was I did happen to be the backer of what was the world's biggest Bitcoin mining operation for about 6 years. And this is a book about the creation of Bitcoin and the early days of the industry. And, great on the back, Wences and CZ and Richard Branson and Adam Back, they're all part of it, so they all endorse the book. But you're going to get a QR code from Raid to get a free copy of the book.
And one more question. Our audience is all innovators, founders, investors. Where should they be applying their sword? Where do you think that they should be focusing on?
I would love to see a lot of the right kinds of innovation around the applications of AI. I'm working now on the intersection of AI and healthcare and AI and longevity. I think there's some great opportunities coming there. I think the intersection of AI and blockchain is also another one. I think those are probably it. And the energy field, if you can do it. But energy is one of these things that it's very capital intensive, and it's very hard because it's an infrastructure thing. But if you guys could come up with incredibly cool, capital light, novel solutions on how to manage electricity better, we are gonna need that in spades in about 18 months.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you, Bill Tai. I know everybody appreciates it.
Thank you.